They hired someone to pour in some acid as he fell asleep outside the house. Uju believes that if Nkem lost his sight, there is no way he could see any vision, let alone save the king. Once upon a time, in a small Nigerian village, there lived a young prince called Nkem. Nkem was the first child born into a family of a Nigerian king with two wives. On the day Nkem was born, the villagers experienced a torrential rainfall that brought an end to their 3-year long drought. The men, women, and children of the village jubilated at the first sign of rainfall, and they praised the gods for blessing them with rain again. But the birth of Nkem also brought about a tragedy in the village, the death of his mother, who was the king's first wife. After the death of Unoma, the king's second wife, Uju, took care of the baby Nkem. Ever since Nkem was born, the villagers experienced great peace and tranquility, and the years of famine came to an end. Uju also gave birth to her son Emeka shortly after Nkem was born, and ever since then, she has been looking for ways to get rid of Nkem and make her son the only heir to the throne. Nkem is gifted with the power to move things and make things happen. When Nkem screams in anger, the earth would move and things would break. A lot of people who try to bully him end up regretting their actions. When Nkem is very happy, the village would experience peace, and when he wished for rain, the weather would change within seconds and it would rain even when the sun shines bright. Nkem started moving things when he was only 5 years old. With his power, he would defend the defenseless and save the people who needed saving. As he grew up, he made a great number of enemies, and the people would often whisper among themselves. They would call him names like wizard, evil, child of the devil, and so on. With time, Nkem tried as much as possible to conceal his power from the public. The absence of a mother figure in Nkem's life made life quite challenging for him. His stepmother, Uju, and her son Emeka are threatened by Nkem as the first son and heir to the throne. Since Uju's son Emeka would be the next heir to the throne if anything happens to Nkem, Uju began to hatch a plan to make her son the only heir to the throne. One day, she told her son Emeka to steal the king's crown and place it inside Nkem's bag to make him look like a thief. Nkem saw how the events occurred with his third eye. He switched the crown from his bag back to Emeka's bag as he stood at the window looking at Emeka. Emeka went to his mother to inform her that he had successfully placed the crown in Nkem's bag, not knowing that Emeka had switched it back. Hours later, the king began to search for his crown around the house, and after searching without success, he asked the guards to bring his kids and their bags. When the guards checked the kids' bags, they found the crown in Emeka's bag and he was shocked. He pleaded with the king and confessed to stealing the crown. He also confessed that his mother asked him to steal the crown and put it in Emeka's bag. The king was very angry and he banished her and her son from the village. At this time, Nkem was 10 years old. As the guards took Emeka away, he casted a questioning look at Nkem, but he smiled mischievously in return. When they got to the village border, away from the guards, Emeka told his mother that Nkem must have switched the crown and he wondered how he was able to do that. His mother then explained to him that Nkem has always been a powerful child since he was born, and she has done everything to get rid of him, from trying to poison him to taking him far away from the village when he was very little, but he always found his way back to the village. She also told Emeka that there was a time she paid a palace guard to kill Nkem in the forest, but Nkem returned to the palace unhurt. That day, he came to her and warned her severely to stop trying to kill him, or he would teach her a lesson she would never forget. It was at that moment that she decided to stop trying to kill Nkem. But now that they are banished from the village because of Nkem, she told Emeka that he must do everything to be taken back by the king and take the throne from the king. 5 years later, Nkem's power has become more pronounced, and he began to show it to people around him without any bother. His father, the king, is against witches, and Nkem has seen how he has dealt with witches over the years. So he tried his best to hide his powers from the king and within the powerless walls. One day, Nkem was at the market when he saw a boy being dragged away by a running horse. He used his power to stop the horse, and the people around were surprised. He quickly covered his face with his hoodie and ran off. He is scared that someone might recognize him and tell his father. The people whispered and wondered how a wizard could be in the village despite the punishment meted out on past witches and wizards. Another time, a man was trying to save his son, who fell into a very deep well. People gathered around screaming and crying as father and son tried to get out of the well without success. Inkem got to the scene and used his power to bring them out. The people around were shocked and they ran off, calling Inkem a wizard. Inkem quickly ran off again, afraid that someone might tell the king about his powers. The next day, Nkem was walking along a forest path when he was stopped by two men. The men told him that they saw him performing magic and they would inform the king about it. Nkem began to beg the man. He promised to do anything if they refused to tell the king about his magic. After begging them for hours, the man finally agreed, but only on one condition. He asked to convince the king to accept Emeka and his mother back to the palace. Nkem told the men that he cannot promise them that because the king is a very stubborn man and a man of his words. He asked them for another condition, but the men insisted it had to be the same condition. He was given 3 days to do this, or he would be reported to the king. Nkem became confused and he did not know how to convince the king to bring Emeka and his mother back to the palace. A thought then occurred to him later that night. The next day, Nkem met the king and explained to him that Emeka is seriously ill and needs to be taken to a healer. The king was angry with him. He asked him why he was seeing Emeka after being banished from the village, but Nkem replied that he heard the news from the villagers and he thought of letting the king know. He begged the king to pardon Emeka and his mother and take them back. The king thought about it for a while and he agreed. Nkem was very happy. Later that day, he told the men that the king has agreed and he saw Emeka and his mother come out of a hut nearby. He was surprised. They told him that they've been in the village for days now when he kept staring at them. Emeka pretended to be really sick and he was taken to the palace. But before the king allowed them back to their rooms, he warned them not to engage in any shady deals that would make him angry again, or he would throw them inside the prison for months before punishing them. Uju and her son Emeka apologized and promised to be at the best behavior now that they are back. Weeks passed and Uju and her son pretended to have turned a new leaf until one day, Nkem was sitting beside the king, listening to his stories when Uju served the king his meal. Nkem looked at the food and found out it was poisoned. He wondered why his stepmother would want to poison the king, and it dawned on him that she wants her son to ascend the throne quickly, and the only way to achieve this is by killing the king and him. He poured the food away with his magic and quickly packed the plates. The king did not understand what just happened. He was angry at Nkem for being clumsy. Nkem apologized and quickly cleaned up the mess and went to dish another food from the pot for the king. Emeka and his mother watched from a distance, filled with rage. They wondered why Nkem would always be the stumbling block to achieving their wicked aim. Days later, Emeka and his mother began to hatch another plan. They both decided to lure the king outside his room by midnight and hire someone to kill him before he goes back inside. Nkem could foresee the plans of his stepmother and her son, and he decided to protect the king at all costs. He sat outside the house that night, waiting for the king to come outside the house. But Uju and her son did not carry out their plan that night. They decided to teach Nkem a lesson instead. That way, they could carry out their plans without any hindrance. They hired someone to pour in some acid as he fell asleep outside the house. Uju believes that if Nkem lost his sight, there is no way he could see any vision, let alone save the king. As soon as he fell asleep, the man poured the acid in his eyes and body and he fled away. Uju and Emeka also ran inside their rooms and pretended to be sleeping. Nkem screamed out loud, and everyone, including the king, rushed outside. The people exclaimed and wondered what would have happened to Nkem. But his stepmother started screaming that Nkem is a wizard who wanted to harm the king. She lied that she saw him in the king's room before he came outside the house and screamed. She also told the king that Nkem has done more harm than good to the people around him and she has evidence. Would you ask the king to wait until morning and she would bring some witnesses to the palace? The king applied the soothing oil on Nkem's face and body as he screamed in pain. The next morning, Uju woke up very early. She had paid all the people who were present when Nkem used his power at the market and when he saved the drowning man and his son. They all corroborated Uju's story and accused Nkem of wizardry. Nkem was very disappointed that the people he helped could testify against him. The king asked Nkem if the people are telling the truth, but he began to cry. He tried to explain to the king that his life is in danger and was trying to save him when someone poured him acid. But the king shut him up and asked his guards to lock him up in the cell. The king was heartbroken that his first son and heir to the throne is a wizard. The king loved his dead first wife, Norma, so much that he thought of banishing a child, and his first son seemed like he had not a crack. He thought of what to do for days, but he couldn't come up with anything. Uju tried her best to make him banish Nkem, but the king would snap at her and send her away in anger. When the king refused to do anything about Nkem, after 7 days, Uju poisoned the king, and this time, Nkem was not there to stop him from eating the food. Uju ensured that no one saw her while she served the king, and she removed the plate of food as the king finished eating. Uju saw the lifeless body of the king, and she called her son to confirm if he is truly dead. The mother and son jumped up and hugged themselves, happy that their plan worked out this time. Then they went out and began to scream for help, pretending that they only met the lifeless body of the king. Nkem felt the king's sudden demise, and he knew immediately that his stepmother and her son had gotten what they have always wanted, the death of the king. Uju summoned the village elders and the king was confirmed dead. Ideally, when the king dies in the community, there would be a 3-month mourning period before another king would ascend the throne. But after a few days of mourning, Uju began to pester the village elders to make her son ascend the throne as soon as possible. The elders explained that Nkem should be the next king, but Uju was hell-bent on making her son the new king as fast as possible. She explained to the elders that Nkem is a wizard and as such cannot be made the king. The elders did not know what to do. They told her that they will have to consult the oracle and appease the gods, but Uju's patience was running out. She bribed the village elders with yams, rice, beans, and other foodstuffs to make the process faster. And surprisingly, her son Emeka became the new king barely 1 month after his father's death. As soon as he became the king, Uju made all the rules for Emeka. They increased the market women tax and took over some people's land by force. Soon, the villagers began to grumble about the sudden changes taking place in the village. Uju deliberately left Nkem in the cell for 3 months, where he is fed only once every day. Our aim is to make him die inside the cell, but after 6 months of being starved and maltreated in the cell, Uju decided that it was time for Nkem to leave the village. Emeka summoned the village elders and told them that it was time for Nkem to leave, and they all accepted. When Nkem was relieved to the banished, the people whom he helped avoided him like a plague because one side of his face and body was burnt from the acid poured on him that night he tried to save the king. The guards pushed him out of the village with a long stick and he was sent out, never to set his foot on the village again. Nkem became an outcast, despised by the same villagers he saved and protected. They believed he was cursed and shunned him at every turn. From the day Nkem set his foot outside the village, a terrible drought struck the land and the villagers' crops began to wither and die. Nkem had decided not to set foot in the village again, but the news of the misfortune that had befallen his village got to him, and he decided to help the villagers. He went to the market square and using his powers, he summoned the rains, bringing life-giving water to the parched earth. But Emeka and his mother pretended like he did nothing and they never acknowledged him. The villagers rejoiced, but their gratitude was short-lived. Instead of thanking Nkem, they accused him of using dark magic to manipulate the weather. They refused to acknowledge his heroism and continued to treat him with contempt. He had to go back to being in exile. Heartbroken, he left the village and used his powers to create a beautiful garden in the forest where he lived surrounded by the beauty and wonder of nature. After months of extreme droughts, the villagers suffered from hunger, and Nuju and her son could no longer calm them because they had begun to revolt and demand for solutions. The people began to make demands for Inkem to be brought back to the village and made the king, but Uju threatened the villagers for demanding that a wizard become their king. The demand continued, and the people continued to protest for days. Uju begins to hatch another plan, and this time she is determined to take Nkem's life and make him disappear forever, just like his father. Days later, Nkem was taking a nap outside his hut when he heard some footsteps. He opened his eyes and found five palace guards walking towards him. He rubbed his palm on his face to be certain that his eyes were not deceiving him, and he found out that indeed he was not dreaming. He got up immediately, running away as the guards chased after him. Nkem ran off as the five guards chased after him. When he got to a point in the forest, he stopped to catch his breath. He hid behind the bushes and from there, he used his magic to stop the men. The men stood there with their guns, fixated on the spot. Nkem casted a spell on them that they should wake up only when someone touches them. He got out of his hiding and walked majestically away from the guards and back to his hut. Nkem packed a few things in his bag and he left for the next village. Meanwhile, Uju was waiting for the guards to arrive, but when she did not see them, she decided to send two more guards. The guards searched Nkem's hut, but found out it was gone. They saw a trail of footsteps and decided to follow the trail. They got to the point where the five guards were standing and they were surprised. They touched them and they regained consciousness. They asked the two guards if they saw Nkem, but they replied that he is nowhere to be found. The guards searched the entire forest until it became dark. They had to go back to break the news to Uju, even though they were scared. When they got back to their village, Uju told them to go back and find Nkem or they would pay with their lives. The guards were very scared. They quickly left to continue their search. As Nkem ran in the forest, he got tired and decided to take a nap. He had barely closed his eyes when he saw an old man walking towards him. When the man got to him, he found out it was his father. He was very happy to see him. His father sat beside him and told him to go back to the village because he is the true heir to the throne. He said he wished that he acknowledged people with magic and treated them well when he was the king, but he now understands that magic is a great gift and can be very helpful when used the right way. He told Nkem to use his magic to bring his people out of hunger and ensure that he takes over the throne at all costs. Nkem nodded as his father spoke and he tried to hug him, but as he opened his eyes, he found out it was all a dream. He picked up his things and off he went to his village. When Nkem got to the village entrance, the guards arrested him and dragged him to meet Uju and her son Emeka, the new king. Uju asked the guards to release Nkem and she sent them away. She asked Nkem why he came back to the village and he replied that he saw the men she sent to kill him. He reminded her of how she tried to kill him when he was a baby and how he warned her to stop trying to kill him, but Uju let out an evil laugh. She told Nkem that she has always hated him and wished that he dies, and now that he is here, she would make it easy for him. But Nkem replied that she can no longer keep him in the cell because while in exile, he had discovered more ways of using his power. Uju called the guards to arrest him, but he stopped them as they moved closer to him. He told Uju that her son needs to leave the throne for him within 3 days, or he would take what belongs to him by force. Nkem left the palace as Uju shook in fear. She began to think of how best to get rid of Nkem, and a thought occurred to her. The next day, She visited a powerful herbalist in the next village and she told him to give her a charm that would help her get rid of Nkem forever. But the herbalist told her that Nkem is a destined child and she cannot kill him. He warned her that if she tries too hard, she may end up regretting her actions. But Uju was hell-bent on killing Nkem. She called the herbalist names and left his place in anger. She visited a witch in another village, and this time she got exactly what she wanted, a very potent poison that would kill Nkem instantly. The witch told her that even a drop of the poison could wipe out an entire village, so she told Uju to be very careful with it. When Uju got back to the village, she met a group of market women protesting because they are not satisfied with the drought and the diseases plaguing the community. They want her to bring Nkem back to the village so he could use his power to liberate them. Uju replied that she has sent a guard to look for Nkem, but it has all been in futility. She assures the women that Emeka is the right heir to the throne and he would deliver, but the women insisted that Nkem has to be the king. The women leader then informed Uju that some villagers saw Nkem the previous day and she asked 24 hours to provide him or they will not take things lightly with her and her son. The people are hungry and they are dying and they need someone who has the power to liberate them, take on the throne. Uju began to panic. She started thinking of how best to harm Nkem without being noticed. She called one of her men to go to Nkem's hut in the outskirts of the town. She told him to watch Nkem, and as soon as he leaves, he should pour the poison in his food or rub it in his plate or spoon. The guard collected the poison and he quickly went off to deliver the message. He hid in the forest outside Nkem's home as Nkem prepared his lunch in his hut. Nkem got out to pick some vegetables and the guard took advantage of that opportunity. He watched Nkem walk away from the kitchen and he quickly entered. He poured the poison in his pot of soup and rubbed some in his plates and spoons and ran off. Moments later, Nkem went back inside his hut and he knew immediately that someone had been there. He opened the pot of soup and found out it has been poisoned. He hissed and went out in search of another food to cook. Meanwhile, Emeka is worried about the happenings around the village. He decided to see Nkem and discuss how he could help the villagers. He set out with a guard and they arrived at Nkem's place after a long walk. Emeka was very tired and hungry by the time they got there. He called out to him, but Nkem was nowhere to be found. He found out that Nkem was cooking before he left and he must be around as the firewood was still hot. He opened the pot and the food happened to be his favorite food. After waiting for a while, he asked the guard to dish some of the food for him as he couldn't bear the hunger anymore. He asked the guard to leave some for Nkem, so the guard did not eat from the food. Nkem arrived shortly after Emeka had eaten the poisoned food. Emeka apologized to Nkem for stealing his position as the rightful heir to the throne. He sought his help on dealing with the issues plaguing his village, but Nkem was more concerned about the poisoned food he just ate. Nkem plucked a leaf nearby and asked Emeka to eat it because he just ate a poisoned food. Emeka ate it reluctantly, but he told him that he's okay and he doesn't feel like he's been poisoned. Nkem was surprised. He asked Emeka to come with him to see his mother, and together they went to the village. By the time they arrived at the village, Emeka's stomach had begun to swell up and he could not walk very well. He was also sweating profusely. Nkem ran to Uju and he asked her if there is an antidote to the poison she put in his food, but she laughed hysterically. She told Nkem that there is no antidote and even if there is, she would never give him. Nkem then replied that her son Emeka was the one who ate the poisoned food and it happened because he went out in search of another food to eat after a guard poisoned his food. Uju stood up, scared at what she just heard. Emeka walked in at that moment, aided by two guards. Uju began to scream as she saw her son writhing in pain. She asked him to sit down and she began to question him. She started blaming Nkem for poisoning her son, but Nkem, knowing how corny she could be, quickly asked the guards to summon the chiefs for a meeting. Uju continued screaming and crying. When the chiefs arrived, Nkem brought out the god of iron and asked the god who poisoned the food to swear by it. The guards swore that Uju sent him to poison Nkem's food, but the young king, Emeka, ended up eating the food when his colleague followed him to Nkem's place. He said he would have warned the king if he knew they were going to see Nkem. At that point, Emeka's stomach had swollen more and he was losing his breath. His mother ran to the witch who gave her the potion, but she informed her that there was no antidote. Uju cried and cried as she headed back to the village and she regretted all her actions. 3 days later, Emeka died and Uju couldn't bear the shame as people pointed accusing fingers at her for killing her son. She left the village as she cries. Months later, after mourning the death of his brother, Nkem was crowned the king and the people rejoiced. This movie teaches us to do good and good will follow us. It also teaches us that when we do evil, we may be unknowingly harming the people who are close to us. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe before you leave and leave a comment below if you enjoyed this story. Bye.